Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. James Humes, a speechwriter for 5 U.S. presidents, said, "The art of communication is the language of leadership." Well, in today's episode, we talk about the art of communication, speaking with conviction and writing for impact, knowing your aim, the power of storytelling, and more. My guest is a husband and father, a communication educator and lecturer at USC's Annenberg School, an author, a leadership communication coach who works with individuals, teams, and entire organizations to communicate with greater mastery. He's a sought-after keynote and TEDx speaker, an active member of the LGBTQ community, and an advocate for suicide prevention, foster care services, and HIV/AIDS research. His writing has appeared in the Washington Post, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Huffington Post, and the Harvard Business Review. Please welcome the man who's teaching us how to communicate for impact and to inspire action, J.D. Schramm. J.D., it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jay. I'm looking forward to this conversation and have been a listener for a while now. Not all of your episodes, but I'm getting my backlog caught up, and it's great to be a part of your lineup.
Outstanding. Well, I appreciate you being here first and foremost. Thank you for being a listener, and I am very much looking forward to our conversation today. So let's dive right in. You know, there are moments in life that can define us. They can change the trajectory of our lives. I would love it if you would share one of those moments that you've experienced in your life.
I think one of the moments that really changed the trajectory of my life, and I'm hesitant to go there because it's different for everyone, but it's something we shared as a nation. But really for me, it was the experience of being in New York City during 9/11. I was, at that point in time, an MBA student. I was 2 semesters away from finishing my MBA. I was doing night school at NYU and working during the day at a online startup that did online training and development. And most of my clients were in the World Trade Center, and I was in and out of that building 2-3 times a week. And when the towers went down, so much changed for so many of us. For me, our company was already kind of on the ropes, and that was a huge blow. And I actually lost my job at the end of that week. But it wasn't it was one of those opportunities. Like I lost my job, but I saw the world like really going through a whole lot worse things than I was going through. And I went to NYU and I said, "Hey, can I bump up and add 2 more classes so that I graduate by December?" And they said, "That's not usually how we do things, but we can make this happen for you." And that shifted my experience of higher ed, of being at NYU. I fell in love with being on a college campus. I was both there in the day as well as in the evening now. And I finished all of my courses by December of 2001 and did an informational interview with one of my profs. And I said, "How do I get your job? How do I do what you do?" And sure enough, he was double scheduled for the spring semester, and they were struggling to fill his strategy class. And he said, "Go talk to JD. He wants to teach." And and that started, now an over 20-year career of working in higher ed at a lot of really remarkable universities. And had I not taken that moment and said, "Okay, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to turn this? How am I going to pivot?" I may have ended up in higher ed, but I'm not sure. And it certainly was, when I think of a pivotal moment, Jay, that was one that shifted things for me.
So as you think back, and thank you for sharing that story, but as you think back, what did you learn about yourself through that experience?
I think I learned what really touches me and where I feel my best contributions can be made. I, for a long time before, I was in my late 30s, I think, at this point, but for a long time before, I had done coaching and speaking and helping people do presentations more effectively. But I don't think I realized it could be that it was as core to me as I realized, that it was. And shifting into full-time teaching and recognizing that this field of being a communication coach, guide, speaker, trainer is not only something that lights me up and makes me feel like I'm making a difference for people, but it's something that all industries need, all careers, depending, regardless of the level you are in the organization. Somebody with communication expertise can add value to you. And so I think I began to see that there was a worth and a value in what I naturally did that I wasn't aware of until that shift and that pivot.
Hmm. That is so interesting. And I'm wondering, did you begin to understand that fairly quickly as you were going through this, or was this something that you discovered with the perspective of time?
Hmm. Boy, that's really hard to know how to answer, Jay, because I'm answering with the perspective of time. I think that it was probably a slow realization that gathered steam, and I think it was also right on top of how awesome it was to be on campus at a university, and the energy and the engagement with undergrads, with graduate students, with my colleagues on the faculty. Um, and so I think it really, I can source it back to that moment, but I think it was a slow realization that just kept building for me to the point where I'm at now. Although I'm no longer working full time in academia. I had a remarkable 20 years, including 13 at Stanford and a year at Columbia, and 5 years at NYU. I now teach for USC's Annenberg School of Communication, which is an evening program like I was in. It's an online program. And so I still have my finger in academia, but most of my work, much like I think yours is, Jay, is working with business leaders and entrepreneurs and organizations where I'm not on a campus full time, but I'm trying to bring those insights and those realizations to the companies I get to work with.
Yeah, outstanding. Well, thank you for that. So, JD, in your first TED Talk, you talk about your struggles with addiction and depression that culminated in a suicide attempt. What inspired you to share your personal story, and what impact has that had on your life since that time?
Thanks for asking, Jay. Uh, a year earlier, I was at TED, and when you attend TED, I was at a simulcast event of TED. There's a place in the program where participants can sign up and do a talk. So the first year I went, Glenna Fraumeni, who became a friend of mine, did one of these participant talks. Her talk was 3 minutes long. It's not on the TED website because she chose not to make it public, but she shared about her struggle with a brain tumor. And I remember the ending of her talk very powerfully. She said, by December 25th, 3 years from now, I'll probably be gone. Where will you be? You could have heard a pin drop in that auditorium. And it hit me, and I wrote in my journal, when will I tell my story? A year later, signed up to go to TED Active, and this time signed up to do a participant talk of 3 minutes in length. And it had percolated for a year. Other than family members, close friends, rooms of recovery, I had not told anyone of my own journey with depression and with suicide and addiction. And that TED Talk was the first time I had been public about it. And I wasn't sure, much like my friend Glenna, I wasn't sure if I was going to let TED put it up on their website, but the experience of delivering the talk with, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred people in the amphitheater where I did it, and their experience of me afterwards, I took a few months to decide, but I ultimately decided to let TED put it up. And I've had nothing but positive response from people, opportunities to make a difference in the recovery and the depression communities. And so it was a risk, and it was something I was scared of doing when I did the talk, and then when I ultimately allowed them to put it online. But I had nothing to fear. It's only had positive benefits as far as I've ever seen.
Well, it is as I was watching that TED Talk and listening to that story, clearly it was not only emotional, but it certainly gave me chills and gave me a lot to think about. And I really tried to think about you and not only the story and what you went through, but how you must have felt on that stage, sharing that story the way that you did, and being able to connect with that audience through your words, through your body language, through that story. And I was really trying to wrap my head around what that experience must have been like for you. So I thank you for sharing that. After the TED Talk itself, the crowd that was in that audience, what type of response did you receive? What type of comments were made directly that evening? What was the interaction like? Were there any either questions that were asked or things that people shared or said to you that surprised you?
Yes, because it was the first time I had been that vulnerable and that open with strangers. Much like Brene Brown says, it makes it easy for other people to then be vulnerable with me. And so people sought me out in the line at the food truck, or as I was doing another activity or getting a badge or whatever, and they wanted to share their own struggles or their sister's struggles, or that they'd lost a parent or lost a son to depression or suicide. And I realized there's a privilege in being able to hold space for people who have something they need to also share. And my journey is different than yours or than your listeners, but by being far enough along and comfortable enough that I could take that risk, I made it possible for other people to take that risk. And those are the kind of conversations, the kinds of emails that I still get. Like, that was 12 years ago. And every month I get one or two emails from people who saw the talk and sought me out and want to connect or have questions or find resources. And it's a privilege to get to hold that place in their lives.
Well, what a privilege and a beautiful gift for you to give to others, to share that story and open up that type of conversation and give voice to people who may not have had the courage to do so, the strength to be able to do so without seeing an example of someone else being able to do exactly that. So that's powerful and amazing. And I'm curious as I think about that, and I want to stay on this point for just a moment or two. So I mentioned in the intro that you're an advocate for suicide prevention. So if talking to our audience right now, is there a piece of advice or something that you would share to help individuals and organizations who want to create that safe and supportive environment so they can have conversations around mental health? Sometimes these are very tough conversations, difficult conversations to have. Mm-hmm. What advice would you share based on your experience?
Two thoughts come to mind. One, I think it is far better now than it probably ever has been to have these conversations in the workplace. I think COVID really, for all the dreadful things that happened with COVID, really kind of pulled the curtains back on our lives, literally, as we were all, doing business meetings from our dining room tables or our bedrooms, and enabled people to bring their full self to work and have these conversations. Not to say every workplace is welcoming just overnight, but I think we've got an opening right now that we haven't had before. So to your question, what leaders can do is to take advantage of that opening to themselves as they're comfortable, as they're at a place that they can to share their journeys, their struggles, and to create a climate and an environment where employees know if they choose to do that, they will not suffer any negative consequences, but they'll be supported in that environment. So that's the first thought I have is let's seize this moment, and part of what's making this moment possible is people are struggling a lot right now, even as we go back to work. The second piece is just by talking about suicide does not mean you are going to increase the likelihood of suicide. When you directly ask somebody who's struggling, wow, you're going through a hard time right now. I can't imagine what you're experiencing. Has this made you think you might attempt suicide? People are fearful to ask that question because they don't want to give the idea. That's not going to happen. You're not going to increase deaths by suicide by bringing it up. If anything, you're going to decrease deaths by suicide by bringing it up. And if the person was like not in that realm whatsoever, they're like, oh no, it's not that big of a deal. Or if they're like, how could you tell? And as lay people, we can help people get to resources like 988, which is both phone and text, or the crisis text line, which I just learned, I volunteer for them. And I just learned the other day, their number is 741-741, which is just up the left side of the keyboard on a phone. You just go up twice and you get them. But we ourselves as managers, as leaders, as lay people, we don't have to have all the answers. We just need to make it safe for people to have the conversation and then help them find the right resources.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that information. Greatly appreciated. So you had brought up, you mentioned the word vulnerability, and vulnerability in communication. Is there a point in which we are being too vulnerable? How do we know when we should be vulnerable and if we're being vulnerable enough? I don't know if I'm asking that question the right way. Perhaps you can push back on me, maybe rephrase it in a way that may land better for our audience.
Well, what I think at the heart of your question, Jay, is how do we self-regulate as a leader, as a communicator, to know how much is too much, how much is too little? And there is no silver bullet answer for us. I think the first level is, what am I comfortable with? What is appropriate and authentic for me to be able to share? I didn't share my struggles with depression and suicide till 6 years after my attempt. The attempt was in 2003 and the TED Talk was in 2011. People doing math out there, that's 8 years, not 6 years. But I had to have some distance from it before I shared about it in a public setting. So you've got to know for yourself, I'm ready to talk about a struggle with gambling, or that I have a child who's neurodivergent, or that I, have, I've had 2 clients recently that we've talked about sharing the loss of a child and being able to talk about that. Like you've got to personally be at a place you're ready to share. And then the second part of the equation is the audience at a place to receive that information? And there I've got to do some analysis and a little bit of guesswork and a little bit of trusting, but knowing that I'm about to share something that may be difficult for people, or may be hard for people, or may be unfamiliar in a public setting, and to caution a little bit and to acknowledge, for me to make this point, I actually need to share something from my own life for you to understand this better, and to give people that space that you're going to go there. And so I think those 2 levels of analysis will help us know, are we ready to take that step? And I guess the last question I would ask is, and what is the intention in sharing? If I'm unclear on the intent for sharing, it's probably not the right time to share yet. If my intent is to close a deal, to sell a house, to then maybe that's not where I should be exercising the muscle of vulnerability. But if I want to make space for somebody else to be vulnerable, if I want to point people to resources or crisis that they may not be aware is out there, all of those very valid intents could be a reason for a leader to step more into vulnerability than she or he has been used to in the past.
Very good. So as you were sharing that, it reminded me of the AIM model that you talk about in your book. And I'd love it if we could explore some of the key areas in your book, Communicate with Mastery. This is an excellent, excellent book, and obviously we're going to put links to purchase the book in the show notes, as well as links to your TED Talks, and I would encourage everyone to watch the TED Talks and absolutely go out and purchase a copy of Communicate with Mastery. So this book to me is an outstanding resource, and it provides really great tools and approaches that we can all use in any situation, right, where communication is necessary. And you give us very specific examples and those tools to be able to incorporate. So for the purpose of our conversation, I'd really like to focus on 3 main areas from the book. The AIM model, I think that's a great starting point. The recipe for successful communication, and then writing for impact. And there's much, much more depth to the book, but those 3 areas I would love for us to spend a few moments on. So if we could, let's start with the AIM model. Why don't you explain that to us and how important that is when it comes to communication, presentation, etc.?
Absolutely, Jay. It's page 3 of the book. Almost every class or workshop that I teach, it comes out in the first 3 to 5 minutes of a workshop, because I think it is so fundamental to everything we do. So for viewers who are seeing me, you can see my hand gestures. For those who are just listening, it's just simply a triangle, and the bottom of the triangle is the A and the I. The top of the triangle is the M. And the AIM acronym stands for audience, intent, and message. And the first place you start is audience analysis. Who am I speaking or writing to? What's going to motivate them to take action? What's going to annoy them to not take action? What do they already know about the subject? What do they wish they know? And that level of audience analysis is crucial for a leader to have their communication be effective. But the other base of the triangle is intent. As a result of this communication, what do I want them to think? Or more importantly, what do I want them to say or do? And being clear on my intent is not just knowing, again, that I want to close a deal or I want to move to the next phase of a project, but it's what do I want the person on the other side to do as a result of this conversation? And the mistake many leaders make is they jump immediately to the top of the triangle, to the M. What's the message I need to share? What's the message I want to get out there, without slowing down to consider who needs to hear it and what's the action that I want them to take because of it. Every time I talk about the model, I give huge credit to Lynn Russell, who was at Columbia's Business School, and Mary Munter, who was at Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business. They created this in a book in the late 90s, which was a guide to presentations. I've fallen in love with it and taught it for many years since then. And I think it's not just for presentations. It's for an email you write, a phone message you leave, a TikTok you create, like whatever channel you're going to use. Slow down. Who's my audience? What's my intent? And then create a message that's going to cause that audience to take that action.
So let's give a couple real world examples. And I'm thinking of one. Let's say that we have an audience member who is going to be giving an investor pitch here soon. Or another example might be someone who is interested in joining a board of directors of a nonprofit organization, and they're reaching out to the board members, the president of the board. So either of those scenarios, let's use the AIM model in action. So walk us through picking one of those, or perhaps maybe you have one of your own that we can use as an example to better understand those steps.
Certainly. I'll take the entrepreneur one, but if there are any viewers or listeners out there who want to play with board search, I'm glad to have that conversation. Reach out to me, because I'm in the midst of doing that myself to find a place that I can serve on a for-profit board or startup board. But let's get back to the entrepreneur. And she needs to start with that audience analysis in terms of who is this potential investor? Where else have they put their money? Where have they put their money and seen revenue? Where have they put their money and lost? Like, what is the size and length and like all of that research, which is readily available for most. And private investors a little harder, but certainly for VCs and public investors, to have a sense of that history. Now, I may not use all of that history in my pitch, but I want to know it. I want to understand it. And then using that, be thoughtful about where you're at in the process in terms of what is your intent. Now, and many entrepreneurs, they may go through 40, 50, 90 investor calls, to raise their Series A or their first round or a seed round. But the intent here is not, I want to get money from this person, but the intent is, what is the next logical step in the process? And so if it's an initial pitch, I want to get invited back to meet the partners. Now, ultimately, yes, I do want a check from this company, but I don't want to enter the conversation thinking about the check. I want to enter the conversation thinking about the second date, not the marriage and the children, thinking about the next logical step that we want to go into. And so in what I share, to be able to say, I'd love to bring my CTO out to your office and give a full demo of this. In our next meeting, I could certainly bring with me some of the letters we've received from customers who appreciate our product. And so I don't want to be high pressure, but I just want to assume that's where we're going to go so that we can build this relationship further. The interesting thing about intent, especially for entrepreneurs, sometimes your intent is you want them to give you money, but you end up getting advice. And often that advice is more valuable than the money that they might have invested. And they may have critiques of your product or critiques of your market or critiques of the way that you've set up your operating model. Don't dismiss that, because that, depending on their experience, that could be expertise that's really valuable to you. So that's how I would use the A and the I to tailor the message that I'm going to deliver. And most entrepreneurs, they have a deck that they go out to pitch from, but don't be married to getting through all 10 slides or all 30 slides. Be flexible to go where that person has the most interest or the most resistance, so you have a conversation rather than do a speech at them. And that's where you get very flexible with what's in that pitch deck and which parts of it do I share when.
Brilliant. Fantastic. I thank you very much for going through that example. I think it gives us certainly a level of clarity in how we can apply that in different areas that are applicable to what we're working through or things that we want to be able to accomplish. And you also go through that in much more detail in the book as well. So let's move to the recipe for successful communication. So walk us through, there's really two aspects or three aspects of that. Walk us through those and let's create an example there too.
I'm trying to see if we could use the other example you offered of somebody going to a board seat,
Sure.
pursuing a nonprofit board seat, and so we'll assume that with the example that they've already done their AIM analysis, and let's kind of look at the recipe for successful communication to be what they've done before, during, and after that experience. And so the before, for the most part, has been the AIM work, the prep work that they have done. It's really in that second part of the recipe, that during moment of active listening, drawing out of the other person what's interesting to them, what their needs are, better understanding the needs of the nonprofit, the needs of the organization, and not listening as a way to, I'm going to jump in with this answer at this point. It's not a manipulation or a mechanical process. You really want to understand those needs and ask them to tell you stories. If in an interview setting like that, whether it's with one member of the board or the entire board, if I can get them to do more talking than I'm doing, they'll think it has been successful. They've heard their own voice. Jay, this has been a great podcast interview because I've heard my own voice quite a bit of the time. And so we like hearing our own voices. And so we want to draw that the person who's interviewing us to share what they can, to tell stories, to illustrate what they mean. But the real recipe for success, I think, is then what happens after the meeting. Do you do the follow-up on time? Do you meet the promises that you have made in the meeting? Um, uh, I'm old school. I'm pushing 60, so I grew up in the 1970s, and my dad was a World War II vet, and so I'm very old school about. I still do handwritten thank you notes, and if I don't have an address, then I may send a text or an email, but it still is tailored. It's not a cookie cutter. And I look for, again, what's that next logical step? Maybe there's an article I can share with it. Maybe there's a TED talk that would be really appropriate for where they're at, or something that came up in the conversation. And so really taking what I do after to be able to then tie to the next conversation or the next meeting. And some people are great at in the moment, or they're great at the prep and the planning, or they're great at the follow-up. I think for a leader to be successful, we've got to acknowledge we have to be present and focused on all three parts of the process.
Absolutely. So before we move to the third big item that I'd like to explore with you, I just want to make a point to everyone that's watching and listening right now. You know, you'll see me, if you're watching this, you'll see me taking notes. I take a lot of notes during these conversations. Could I go back and re-listen to the episode? Of course I can, and of course I will. Taking notes, though, helps to ingrain the information in our minds, and JD is sharing a wealth of information with each and every one of you that we can all apply to improve our level of communication and ultimately be better and more effective leaders. So please make sure that you are taking notes, that you're listening, actively listening. And if you have any questions whatsoever in regards to this podcast, make sure that you're leaving those questions in the comments, and we'll provide ways that you can connect with JD as well. So let's go ahead and continue
Jay,
the conversation.
Can I jump in and give a tip that I've never, ever given? This is the first time I've ever shared this tip.
Wonderful.
For those of you who are listening to the podcast and you're driving or you're on the subway or you can't be sitting there taking notes, what I have started doing as I listen to podcasts like Jay's, if there's a particular moment in that podcast that I want to go back and listen to, or more importantly, that I want to share with somebody, I can real quickly, even safely, and certainly at a stoplight, I can do a screenshot of just the podcast at that moment. And I may forget, why did I want to stop at, 42 minutes and 30 seconds in, but I'll go back to that podcast and I'll forward to, oh, that was the story about the World War II vet that I wanted to send to so-and-so. And so even if you're listening, find ways that you can still access the gold that you find in the podcasts you listen to.
I love that. That's a great tip. Fantastic. First time that's been shared. So
first time shared. I've only been doing it for a few months now. So
pure gold. Excellent. So let's talk about writing for impact. I mean, you've alluded to this, but this is an area that, the verbal side, speaking in front of people, presentations is certainly one area and a very important area of communication. Writing, equally as important. So let's talk about writing for impact. How can we,
Sure.
what are the things that we should be paying attention to, and how can we get better? How can we truly create impact that leads to action in our writing?
Absolutely. I'm going to be very tactical in terms of how I answer this question, because while many people recognize they need to work on public speaking, it's less likely that people recognize their writing needs some help. And so there's a couple of simple strategies that I think will help people improve their writing. The first is what I call the ABCs of business writing. Your writing should be active, brief, and clear. Active meaning use the active voice. Don't difference between saying mistakes were made, the famous one from the Reagan administration, to saying I made a mistake. That's active voice. But you want to scour your writing to be as active as possible, using active verbs. The weakest verbs in the English language: is, are, was, were, has, have, had. Not that you can never use them, but man, if you can reduce your use of them and use instigate, eliminate, create, build, use a verb that has an active tense to it. So in your writing, the more that you can be active, the better. Brief. No one complained that an email was too short. I guess you could get too short, okay? But if I can take a 3-page email and make it into a 1-page email, if I can take a 4-paragraph message, make it into a 2-paragraph message, each time I edit, I see, can I make this shorter without losing the key content? There's a diminishing return, okay? So, and if I need to guide you to another resource, include a PDF or send people to a website, but make it as short as possible because people have such short attention spans. For the most part, a lot of senior leaders are going to be reading their document on a phone. So that first paragraph, that executive summary, that you really want to make sure your point is clear and that you've drawn them in. And so write in a way that's brief and then clear. You want to make it easy for them to get your point. And one of the simplest hacks, if you will, to being clear is just how you use your subject line, your headings, your subheadings, your bullets. You want to write a document that if somebody's really busy, they're jumping in a cab to the airport, if they just read the headings and the subheadings, they should get the point of the document. And too many times we just use, overview, conclusion, financials. No, tell me about the financials. Give me a half sentence or a sentence that synthesizes the document instead of saying conclusion. And if people can approach their writing being active, brief, clear, well formatted, make it easy for the reader to take the action that you want, you will see a dramatic increase in the power of your emails, power of your text messages, the power of what you do in the written word. And you will begin to resent the people who write a 1-page, 1-paragraph email at you. And you're like, oh, this is going to make it so hard for me to figure out what you want.
So true. I love this. This is such incredible information. I had a senior leader once who, very busy person, very short attention span, and would always say, just give me the highlights, right? Just give me bullet points. And if I need to explore more deeply, I will. But if you're giving me paragraphs of information, I'm not even going to look at it, right? It's just too much for my mind, my brain to be able to process at one time. So just give me nuggets of information, and then I'll ask questions if I need to, or you can send me a more detailed explanation of each of those bullet points if needed.
And what's inherent in that, Jay, to get to those bullet points, I have to have probably done the document.
True. That's true.
I can't just get to 6 bullets on a slide and say I've done my work. I probably have to have written the 5-page report or the 10-page report and then synthesize it down.
Absolutely.
That's why I coach my students, always write the executive summary at the very end. When you do an email, the last thing you do is the subject line, because once the email's written, you know what it says, and you can go back and do a compelling subject line. And so don't write it in the way in which they're going to read it. You're probably going to have to do the heavy work first and then synthesize. And sometimes the most compelling work is the title of a document or the title of a talk. And that's what people don't spend their time crafting in a way that draws people in.
Wonderfully said. Ah, I love this. So, how has Chat GPT and generative AI changed the communication landscape based on what you've seen and the coaching clients that you're working with? What is your opinion at this juncture? Positive, negative, helpful, not helpful? What are your thoughts?
My actual thought is I wish I was about 10 years older and I could just ignore ChatGPT and retire. Um, but no, it is a tool like any other tool that has shown up in our workplaces, from the handheld calculator to the desktop, and then the laptop computer, to the iPad, to the phone. Each time we're given a tool, there is both an advantage and a disadvantage, a reward and a risk in using it. The risk I see with ChatGPT is people think it can write for them,
Mm.
and it can't. It's a research tool. It's a first draft tool. It can accelerate your process of getting all the information in front of you, but that means you then really have to shape that information in a way that it's useful and that it's effective. And so I've been in a lot of conversations with fellow academics who are like, oh, you got to have a chat GPT policy in your syllabus so that nobody ever uses it. And I'm like, no, I don't. I have to guide my students how to use it so they can get their assignments done, because that's what they're going to do when they get out of school on the workforce. And so I think we have to have a healthy respect for it. And I think we also have to look at ways that we can deliver information that hasn't been created by ChatGPT, that has some real authenticity to it. But that's my take on it at the moment, and that will probably evolve over the next semester as I see more stuff that my students or that my clients have done, and gone, oh, that's a way I didn't realize you could use it.
Yeah, I'm sure that your thoughts on this will evolve, as we are constantly in a state of change, right? Our beliefs and thoughts on things can change and evolve as well. One thing that I just want to add to this is if you know someone well, if you've been around someone for a while and you've seen the way that they write, and all of a sudden you start to see writing that's in a very different voice than the voice that they have typically used, I can pretty quickly determine if they have been using some sort of AI to produce the content. And I can look at a couple examples right now where I can almost see that there was almost like a light switch that just flipped. And the next day, you could just tell the writing was so very different. So if you're going to use some sort of AI tool like this, I would encourage all of those who are watching and listening to use your voice. Don't copy and paste. It's a research tool, as you said, can help prompt, can help start to generate some ideas and conversation. But copying and pasting is probably not a great idea.
Completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. And the goal would be to use ChatGPT in a way that someone doesn't have the experience of looking at our writing and wondering, did he do that himself? Did she create that herself? And that's getting skillful with the tool, that you are using it in a way that your voice isn't lost, it's amplified and made clearer.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, who are 1 to 2 individuals who model mastery in communication to you?
The first, there's two that I want to mention. The first one that I would mention, Adam Grant, from Wharton's Business School. Everything he writes, every talk I've seen, every podcast I've heard of his, he gets communication at a level that is just effortless as you listen to him. I'm sure it's not effortless on his side, but I think he is one of the models that I aspire to in terms of my ability to reach business leaders and clients, and so he's who I would recognize on that side of it. Um, the other person who is a very prolific writer in terms of books, Nancy Duarte, has written at least 4 books on communication that I know of. She's also the only person I know with a Oscar for PowerPoint design. She and her team at Duarte Design are the ones who did the slides for Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth several years ago. And it was not his bubbly personality that carried that film. It was the power of the visuals. But she recognized that it's not just having awesome PowerPoint or keynote slides. What's the message underneath? What's the story underneath? And she really has done a lot, I think, to alter the way all of us in business look at presentations and look at communication. So those would be the 2 that I would offer: Adam Grant and Nancy Duarte.
2 great examples. That's perfect. Thank you for sharing that. So, JD, as we are wrapping up our conversation today, a couple of things. First, I would love it if you would share a challenge with all of us. What would you challenge our audience and me to do?
My challenge would be to slow down and listen. When you're in the midst of a conversation, don't jump to what your response is, but actually experience what you just heard and maybe clarify what the person meant. My favorite question in a conversation is to say, can you tell me a story about that? Can you explain that to me with a story or an illustration? And I think if we all slow down and listen more, it is difficult to do, but it will enable us to have richer and more compelling communication with people.
Beautiful. Love that. And JD, here's my final question to you. So, what is one of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make in the pursuit of the person you are today?
I think one of the most difficult decisions I had to make was choosing to step out on my own to be a solopreneur. Had a wonderful 13-year experience at Stanford, had 2 jobs at Stanford at the end that I really loved. Both of those came to an end during COVID. And my fearful self said, I got to go get a full-time job. I've got to, and I was in the search for a number of things at different academic institutions, different companies in the Bay Area. And yet none of them quite fit right for me. And I chose to go ahead and launch my own business and do what I love doing at a point when I do have a family of 5. I do have a new mortgage that we're servicing. But it was a difficult decision. My husband supported me in making it. And I'm now able to do some work with organizations and teams and individuals that never would have been possible if I stayed in a full-time employer capacity. But that's probably the hardest. And there may be yet one more employment opportunity out there for me. But that's been the hardest and yet most rewarding recent difficult decision that I've had to make.
Outstanding. Thank you for sharing that. And JD, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I truly appreciate you sharing of your story, part of your career journey, bringing Communicate with Mastery to life, sharing so many amazing insights with us, and just being your true, authentic self. I'm grateful for you, and I appreciate the conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Jay, and I look forward to staying in touch. This was great.
Absolutely. Likewise. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcast? That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing, amazing guests just like JD. So if you would do that, it would be greatly appreciated. And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning and keep growing. Make sure that you pick up a copy of Communicate with Mastery and apply the lessons you learn, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.